Well, we've had permission to introduce our own bill. Executive Council haven't introduced this bill. Well, now, if we want to look after our own affairs, then we should support the bill now as been put forward. To reject it, as has been done today, is just a bit of sheer gimmickry. We're saying to the British government, unless you give us our own home station here with greater power than we've got at the moment, then we're going to still support the pirates. I'm quite sure that whatever we do, whether we'd supported it, whether we'd left it lying on the table, or as we did, throw it out, it'd make no difference. If they want to extend their bill to the Isle of Man by orders in council, they're quite within their rights to do this.
Do you think that they will in fact do this now then?
Well, if I was in their position, I certainly would.
What steps do you think the Manx government would take to fight any further pressure from the British government?
Well, I suppose they'll send a deputation down to London to see them, and they'll come back, as they usually do from these deputations, having achieved nothing. We've got to remember that we asked the British government to negotiate on our behalf on all matters of international telecommunication as long ago as 1949, and this agreement has not been revoked or rescinded in any way. So that therefore the Home Office were really playing with us when they allowed us to introduce our own bill, and if we're going to use it like we have as a bargaining power, well, it's just like, say, shaking your sword in your scabbard when there's no blade on the sword.
You're a member of the Broadcasting Commission on the Isle of Man, and I understand that two members of the Commission were two of the people who supported the bill. Was this a policy decision or a personal one?
Well, both personal and a policy decision by the Broadcasting Commission. We have given considerable thought to this, and it is our view that we cannot support unauthorised stations, which Caroline is. That we have a station on the Isle of Man that's been set up and given exclusive rights by the Manx government to all broadcasting facilities on the Isle of Man. If we're going to start defying the British government, then we should be defying them on behalf of the authorised station. I'm all for a fight if it comes to a fight with the British government, but let's be sure that we're supporting the authorised station and not some unauthorised offshore station.
Mr. Quayle, you voted in favour of rejecting the British government's marine broadcasting offences bill today. Why did you do that?
Well, because I didn't see any great righteousness in the bill. As you're well aware, we have a radio ship anchored off the Isle of Man that has been a wonderful servant to us, particularly speaking for my own particular part of government, that is tourism. But leaving that aside, and that I don't think can weigh too heavily, in fact, the reasons given for the need for this particular bit of English legislation were really under three headings. It must be accepted first and foremost that the pirates, of course, are in fact doing nothing illegal. They are outside territorial waters, therefore in that sense they are not pirates. Where they are coming into dispute with the English government is some of them, shall I say, don't pay performing right fees. Certainly I understand our particular station does. Secondly, they are said to be pirating frequencies. This is true in this particular context, but of course it's only in common with half the stations operating from Europe who have also pirated frequencies. And the third heading of objection is they are supposed to have caused danger at sea by interfering with distress messages and so forth. And yet only 2 weeks ago it was stated in the House of Commons and was not denied that none of the interference had in fact been caused by any pirate ship. Therefore, the three headings which the legislation was introduced into Westminster fall down, in my opinion, and it comes straight back to the fact that they are doing something without the permission of the English government, and secondly, they're making a profit. And this word profit, as far as the present regime is concerned, seems to be a very unpopular word. By
Rejecting the British bill, the Manx government is in fact saying that they welcome Caroline and would continue to service her from the Isle of Man. Is this true?
Yes, in this context, Caroline we maintain, whilst there is nothing in this particular bill that says you shall not broadcast from the high seas, what it does say is that the immediate surrounding area shall not victual the ship, in this case of Caroline, this is the Isle of Man, and secondly, that nobody shall advertise from the particular ship. Now, we do not control advertising, of course, but as far as victualling is concerned, we treat this as a domestic problem, and we reserve the right to ourselves, through Tynwald, through the House of Keys, as happened today, to legislate domestically for the Isle of Man. The whole question of victualling is a domestic problem, it's not an outside problem, and therefore we demand the right that we shall say whether this shall happen or whether it shouldn't.
If the British government now brings an order in council or some similar legislation to force the Manx government or to try and force the Manx government to accept their bill, what do you think the Manx government will do?
Well, I'm only one member of it, of course. My reaction would be to go to a higher authority. This is not an uncommon situation. It happened recently in Malta, of course. I would think that there is still such a thing as democracy, there's still such a thing as human rights, and there's still such a thing as United Nations. If a small minority, and we are a tiny minority in this context, are being subjected to oppression from an outside source.
You would be prepared to go to the United Nations,
Indeed.
you think? Do you not find it difficult to reconcile the fact that you already have a commercial radio station of your own, Manx Radio, on the Isle of Man, and yet you're plugging another commercial radio station almost in opposition to your own?
Well, they're not in opposition. They're two entirely different things. It was stated in the Commons only some 3 weeks ago that local broadcasting would give this homespun sort of approach. It is really finding Mrs. Smith's cat for her, this sort of approach. Manx Radio does this extremely well, but it's enormously limited. The whole of the Isle of Man cannot get Manx Radio. Certainly outside you can't get Manx Radio. And therefore, from any point of view of propagating the island, it is valueless from that, in that context. In the context of bringing the island together and propagating news within the island, events in the island, it is first class. But they're working in two entirely different media in point of fact.
Would you be prepared to welcome Caroline as a shore-based transmitting station on the Isle of Man?
Very much indeed. This would be the obvious answer, because under this new Radio 247, which is the VHF proposed network, of which there, in fact, there are no facts on it yet, but the Postmaster General dwelt on it quite heavily in the debate in the Commons, surely a reasonable answer here would be to base a reasonably powerful station within the confines of the island, running commercially, and serving the rest of Britain. I mean, we're quite prepared to do a deal with England on this. And of course, you coming from that side possibly don't see eye to eye with me on it. But nevertheless, this could be a very possible and a very useful solution to the present problem of providing commercial radio in this country.
Well, those are the two sides of the argument. Several questions seem to emerge from them. Is the Manx government's overwhelming decision to throw out the Marine Broadcasting Bill just a bit of political gimmickry? Have they, in taking this decision, gone past the point of no return and put themselves in line for a head-on collision with the British government? Or will they back down in the face of pressures that are inevitably going to be brought to bear on them? Today, in the Isle of Man, I can listen to two commercial radio stations, Manx Radio and Caroline. Will I still be able to listen to both of them in 6 months' time?
Well, Caroline can't continue broadcasting. The order is being applied. As for UDI, of course, this is not a matter for me. This is a matter for the Home Secretary and the government and the Queen. It isn't a matter for me at all.
Do you feel that it really is important that Caroline should be stopped broadcasting from the Isle of Man?
Well, of course it's important. It's extremely important. The whole issue has been oversimplified. It's not just a case of throwing a crust to somebody on Radio Caroline. We are mucking up the receiving for most of the countries of Western Europe, and Radio Caroline is contributing towards this. All the Western European countries, from Sweden round to France, are bringing in legislation to stop this, and clearly the Isle of Man can't stand out and be a loophole. Even Ireland are doing it this summer.
To turn from Caroline to Manx Radio, why are you limiting Manx on 232 while encouraging the BBC to broadcast to Europe on this wavelength?
Well, Manx Radio, of course, is a commercial radio station. It was given the license to broadcast and finance itself commercially because it was specifically in the Isle of Man and nowhere else. They're wanting to increase this now in order to advertise the Isle of Man. But clearly, if the Isle of Man was given this, then Blackpool ought to have it, and Brighton ought to have it, and Scarborough, and Eastbourne, and Torquay, and all the other resorts.
It's just been announced that, finally, that many Manxmen want to now run their own post office. As Postmaster General, how do you feel about this
Well,
one?
certainly I'm quite prepared to talk about this, and indeed we are talking about it, and it's a very complicated matter. But if proper arrangements can be made about taking over assets and taking over the bits of the service that don't pay as well as the ones that pay, we're certainly willing to consider this.
The Home Office is going ahead with its intention of imposing what we regard as domestic legislation on the island against the wishes of the island government.
Does that mean that Radio Caroline will be banned by order in council in the next few days?
That's true, yes.
Now, what's your reaction going to be?
Our reaction is that this is an absolutely undemocratic step on the part of Her Majesty's government.
What are you going to do next?
Stay their hand until what I would regard as an appeal has been considered.
Well, it's obvious that they're not, from what
They're
you're
not going
saying.
to do so.
So what do you think is likely to happen?
I think it's likely that we will await the appeal nevertheless, because we are, shall I say, a law-abiding community.
How long do you think this will take?
If the Home Office does its part, we should have the result in about a month, because it is being forwarded through the medium of this office.
And in the meantime, does Radio Caroline North go on?
Radio Caroline North will, on the imposition of an order in council, come off the air officially on September the 1st. That's it.
Well, this is where the tiny Manx Parliament meets. It's composed of two houses, the upper
at the beginning of September.
Well, I wish you a pleasant visit, ma'am.
I'm sure I'm going to have a...
Will there be more talks
There will, yes, there will be talks about the station of the Isle of Man and Britain, but not about Radio Caroline, because by that time she'll probably be off the air.
Is there any chance of Britain taking over the island?
Riding at anchor off Harwich and safely outside the 3-mile limit, the innocent-looking ex-ferryboat Caroline is causing quite a stir in official circles. She's a floating broadcasting station, hoping to make a big thing out of commercial radio and waiting for the advertisements to roll in. I'm no pirate, insists Captain Mackay, even if the radio crew are. No danger to his ship so far. Generators supply power for the wireless transmitter. Caroline Radio is on the air 12 hours a day, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. Between those hours, they think, there's a public large enough to attract local advertising revenue. Crew technicians have comfortable off-duty quarters, and to all indications, Caroline is a happy ship. The radio company believe it's all perfectly deep. In the ship's studio, they broadcast with no more concern than if it were all in Broadcasting House.
This is Radio Caroline on 199, England's first commercial radio station. My name's Simon D, with you for the next 2 hours. First one off the top of the pile, the Hollies, Rockin' Robin.
Twiddly, 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 twing, twing, twiddly. He rocks the streets outside the daylight.
It'll be interesting to see if the young men behind this adventure can stand up against the Postmaster General, the BBC, International Telecommunications, and all the other opposition.
Robin, go rock a robin, really gonna rock tonight.